The Laura Ingraham Show.
I think when you're talking about one of our most stalwart allies is Australia, who, by the way, support Trump on the pause and the visa holders and the refugees. Supports them. You have this uncomfortable situation where Australia agreed to house some of the refugees who are on their way to the United States. That's an uncomfortable deal because Trump's obviously not Obama. He doesn't want to deal with them the same way. So I think the president of Australia is like out there hanging with these refugees. Like, what are we going to do? Let's work it out. But I just don't think it's helpful to have this information unless there's some method to this leak madness that Kellyanne Conway's not aware of. I don't think she's acting there when she says, I don't know, you come to your own conclusions. I don't think so.
You're saying it's not from the White House. Are you thinking that it probably got leaked by the State Department?
Well, it's not being leaked from the White House. And I'll leave you to report and your viewers to decide. But I will say this. It's dangerous to have these leaks, whether it's the intelligence reports earlier, which we would not comment on, so we were in a difficult position, but the right position, or calls like this.
A friend of mine who used to work in the Reagan administration sent me an email yesterday. Not going to tell you who it is. He said 7 and 8 years into the Reagan administration when he was working. So he worked in an agency from 87 through the last day that Bush was in office, and until the last day that Reagan was in office in 1989, January 20th. And so he worked in the Reagan administration, 87 to 89. And he said 7 and 8 years into the administration, and the career bureaucrats at my agency were still engaging in passive-aggressive action against the administration's agenda. And remember, Jimmy Carter, had been no Obama in terms of star power or, quote, the desire for fundamental transformation. Trump right now is a much more polarizing figure than Reagan was in 1987. So taming the bureaucracies will be very hard work that will consist not only of mapping grand strategy at places like the Office of Legal Counsel, the Council on Economic Advisors, and so forth, and the White House, but also in the trenches within other departments and agencies. Those assignments are good for young lawyers who want some line management experience. Yeah, lawyers inside the State Department, by the way, or inside of these other agencies. And he recommended that some, people in the Federalist Society they can find a lot of young conservatives, even those who aren't lawyers, to help fill such positions. Trump is going to need several hundred of them. It's more practical than the White House Personnel Office will be able to handle. It's more work than the Office of White House Personnel will be able to handle for many months. He's focusing on the fact that there are a lot of people burrowed into these agencies and these departments who are left of center. They hate Trump. They hate what he stands for. Remember that statement of objection that was released. Print that out for me, Drew, a couple of days ago from State Department workers who were objecting to I believe it was the immigration or the refugee ban, or maybe the comment that Spicer made that if you don't like it, leave it, which is still one of my favorite comments from Spicer. I love that. If you don't like it, leave it. If you work for the administration, you work in the federal government, you don't like it, leave it. No one's begging you to stay. That's a good way of just winnowing down the departments, don't you think? But so the leaks happen when there is someone who has an agenda other than Trump's. Someone inside that pool of people who knew about those transcripts wanted to harm Trump. I don't see any other explanation here. It had to come from the State Department. Had to come from these bureaucrats within the State Department. This is tricky work because a lot of these are career civil servants. They've worked in government for in many cases, decades. And they feel like they are the be-all and end-all on how things should be done. And by the way, they've presided over a decline in American influence, a loss of American power, and the overall decline of the country while they've been burrowed into this bureaucracy. And the thing that they want most of all is to grow government, or certainly preserve the size and the power of the federal government over the people and over institutions and actions that the federal government has no authority over. So they want to preserve the bureaucracy, the power of the bureaucracy. It's, they have a vested interest in stopping any winnowing down of the federal government. These people have got to be tossed out on their ear. Donald Trump is speaking at the National Prayer Breakfast. We might join that in progress if my guys tell me that it's worth doing so. Mark Halperin spoke about this Australia call and the leak.
What is, I think, most significant about this is the shockwaves it's sending through Washington and around the world that this conversation was leaked. The president has to be concerned about that, but for someone to put forward details about this conversation and some of the other conversation he had with the president of Mexico, it is a sign of rebellion within much of the establishment that they are not going to let President Trump operate his way if they can help us.
Leaks. No one should be surprised that this is happening, and it's going to be a big problem. Any way they can undermine Donald Trump in his nationalist fervor. He has a nationalistic approach to foreign policy, to economic policy, to trade and immigration. State Department is inhabited by globalists. They want the global order, they want the global understanding, they want the global community. So we have to be very clear when we're reporting on this, what's really going on. Everyone's focused on the call, calling out Australia. It was 25 minutes. It was a brusque call. It was a diplomatic bungle. I mean, this is the way it'll be reported. But what's really going on, and you really look at it closely, this is why you listen to the show, is that the bureaucracy will be at war with this administration's agenda if they do not tame the bureaucracy. The Spicer comment, love it or leave it, was a good first start, but apparently that message didn't get through. And they're going to have to be very creative in how they staff these agencies and these departments, and how they either transfer people out to other positions or cordon them off, or when they can actually just tame the bureaucracy, cut the bureaucracy. This is where they have to work with Congress. The number of employees in each department can be cut. They can cut each of these federal departments by, I bet they could cut without even blinking, they could cut them by 10%. But I'm sure a lot more. 855-40-LAURA. We're going to take a break on the Laura Ingraham Show. We'll come back. This National Prayer Breakfast is a time for Donald Trump to address the country, but also the faith leaders across the United States who are gathered there today and want to be reassured that the agenda, the domestic agenda of religious liberty, preserving religious liberty, religious conscience rights, the right to life, will be sacrosanct. And, of course, Judge Neil Gorsuch and what he will represent for the judicial philosophy of originalism, textualism as well, is very important in this analysis. We'll come back, bring you that. The leaky boat. I warned you about this weeks ago, and I started to see this happening. It is a bad sign, but it is predictable. Now is the time for Trump to clamp down on it. 855-40-LAURA.
Who said, "The God who gave us life gave us liberty." Jefferson asked, "Can the liberties of a nation be secure when we have removed a conviction that these liberties are the gift of God?" Among those freedoms is the right to worship according to our own beliefs. That is why I will get rid of and totally destroy the Johnson Amendment and allow our representatives of faith to speak freely and without fear of retribution. I will do that, remember. Freedom of religion is a sacred right, but it is also a right under threat all around us, and the world is under serious, serious threat. in so many different ways, and I've never seen it so much and so openly as since I took the position of president. The world is in trouble, but we're going to straighten it out, okay? That's what I do. I fix things. We're going to straighten it out. Believe me, when you hear about the tough phone calls I'm having, don't worry about it. Just don't worry about it. They're tough. We have to be tough. It's time we're going to be a little tough, folks. We're taken advantage of by every nation in the world virtually. It's not going to happen anymore. It's not going to happen anymore. We have seen unimaginable violence carried out in the name of religion. Acts of wanton religious minorities, horrors on a scale that defy description. Terrorism is a fundamental threat to religious freedom. It must be stopped, and it will be stopped. It may not be pretty for a little while. It will be stopped. We have seen and by the way, General, as you know, James, Mad Dog, shouldn't say it in this room, Mattis. Now, there's a reason they call him Mad Dog Mattis. Never lost a battle. Always wins them, and always wins them fast. He's our new Secretary of Defense. We'll be working with Rex. He's right now in South Korea, going to Japan, going some other spots. I'll tell you what, I've gotten to know him really well. He's the real deal. We have somebody who's the real deal working for us, and that's what we need. So you watch. You just watch. Things will be different. We have seen peace-loving Muslims brutalized, victimized, murdered, and oppressed by ISIS killers. We have seen threats of extermination against the Jewish people. We have seen a campaign of ISIS and genocide against Christians where they cut off heads. Not since the Middle Ages have we seen that. We haven't seen that. The cutting off of heads. Now they cut off the heads. They drown people in steel cages. Haven't seen this. Nobody's seen this for many, many years. All nations have a moral obligation to speak out against such violence. All nations have a duty to work together to confront it, and to confront it viciously if we have to. So I want to express clearly today to the American people that my administration will do everything in its power to defend and protect religious liberty in our land. America must forever remain a tolerant society where all faiths are respected and where all of our citizens can feel safe and secure. We have to feel safe and secure. In recent days, we have begun to take necessary action to achieve that goal. Our nation has the most generous immigration system in the world. But these are those, and there are those, that would exploit that generosity to undermine the values that we hold so dear. We need security. There are those who would seek to enter our country for the purpose of spreading violence or oppressing other people based upon their faith or their lifestyle. Not right. We will not allow a beachhead of intolerance to spread in our nation. You look all over the world and you see what's happening. So in the coming days, we will develop a system to help ensure that those admitted into our country fully embrace our values of religious and personal liberty, and that they reject any form of oppression and discrimination. We want people to come into our nation, but we want people to love us and to love our values, not to hate us and to hate our values. We will be a safe country, we will be a free country, and we will be a country where all citizens can practice their beliefs without fear of hostility or fear of violence. America will flourish as long as our liberty, and in particular, our religious liberty, is allowed to flourish. America will succeed as long as our most vulnerable citizens, and we have some that are so vulnerable, have a path to success. And America will thrive as long as we continue to have faith in each other and faith in God.
You're listening to the Laura Ingraham Show. Coming up next, we'll talk to Diane Black, our Budget Committee Chair. We have a lot more as Trump and his daughter greet the body of a fallen Navy SEAL yesterday in secret. What happened after that? We'll bring that to you coming up. Leaky ships sink. Worry about the leaks. Get those plugged up. And they got to act on this. Joining us now is Congresswoman Diane Black, Tennessee's 6th congressional district represented, chair of the House Budget Committee. Very important. We're going to talk to Congresswoman Black about the Democrats' delay tactics on confirmation. But first, we'll chat with her about the perils of a leaky administration. A lot of people, suspecting that these leaks are coming from the State Department, which likely would have access to these transcripts, and what can be done about the leftists burrowed into the administration, those who are career civil servants, career diplomats, many of whom despise Donald Trump. What do you do about that? And she joins us now. Congresswoman, great to talk to you. How are you?
Hey, Laura, I'm great. It's so good to talk with you this morning.
So what about this? This is not the first time we've had leaks. Over the last few weeks, we've written about 2 other occasions where information deliberations were leaked and looked like out of the West Wing. Now we have all the signs pointing to a State Department leak. How seriously should Trump take this?
I think very seriously. This is about our national security. You never know what's going to be leaked. If this is leaked, then what else will be leaked? And I think he has to clean house. That's what we do when we have that kind of thing in our office. We figure it out and we clean it out. And he's got to do that. This is too important for our country and our national security.
We've had this problem in previous administrations, going back to the last 2 years of the Reagan administration. When I worked there, especially when you're dealing with a Republican or a conservative president, there are always going to be these factions who think, okay, I can give him his comeuppance by leaking this out. And it ends up being a persistent and debilitating problem if it's not handled.
Absolutely, and I will say this is certainly very important, considering that this is national security. But we can all look at times in our lives, no matter where we worked, whether it was in government or the private sector, where you don't have trust in your office and you don't have trust among your colleagues. That it makes a very dysfunctional working atmosphere. And that certainly will be the case moving forward unless they find out where this came from and show that they're not going to tolerate it.
Congresswoman Black, let's move on to what's happened to the president's nominees. Both Tom Price and I think Rex Tillerson was held up. Others were held up. Where are we now with the nomination process? Obama was treated much better by Republicans when he came into office, and yet Democrats are pulling all sorts of stunts, like not showing up to try to kill a quorum. The Republicans had to change the rules to avert any problem there. But tell us about what the atmosphere is like right now.
Well, certainly I'm not in the Senate all of the time. I do have Senate colleagues that I speak to on a regular daily basis, but this is a sore loser mentality that is really no way to govern. And when I guess I'm embarrassed when our children, our young adults are watching what's happening here in Washington. How can we expect them to do anything differently, even in their own personal lives or their professional lives, when people that are to be looked up are acting this way? They just have to get over the fact that they didn't win. I mean, I didn't like the fact that we didn't win for the last 8 years, the last 2 presidential, but that is not the way to move forward. And you know what? This isn't even, if you go back and look at the past 6 presidents, of Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton and George Bush, and also the Obama administration, both Democrat and Republican alike. Nearly the entire cabinet were installed by the second week in the White House. This is unprecedented. And we have to have these leaders stand up and start acting like responsible adults. And if they don't, then I think what has to happen is what did happen with yesterday with Price and Mnuchin, and just move forward and find ways to work around them. Certainly the people that are in the Senate that have been there for a long time know those rules better than I do. They're much different than the House, but find a way to work around them. The Democrats would, and we should as well.
Congresswoman Black, let's move on to the Democrats' plan to resist Trump at every turn beyond the confirmation process. We'll move on to Neil Gorsuch in a moment, and obviously this is a Senate vote, not a House vote. But the House of Representatives also sets the tone in how the administration will work with Congress and forge forward, especially on issues of finance and the budget committee which you chair. Is there a sense that the Democrats will work with Republicans on any aspect of his economic plan?
It's a little early to tell. I will say that at least in our first budget hearing that we did have quite a tense conversation, and I think they gave us a picture of where they're going to head. Mr. Yarmouth and I have met, and he is, of course, the ranking member, and we have always had a good relationship. I hope that he can help his members to understand we have work to do, and that we need to work together on the situation we're in here in this country in making it great again. But, Laura, I'm also not naive enough to think that they're going to go along with a whole lot of what we do, which means that our members are going to have to lock arms and not fight with one another and move the policy forward that we know is best for this country.
Are you in the Freedom Caucus, Diane?
I am not.
Okay. So the Freedom Caucus wants to hold Republicans' feet to the fire and Democrats' feet to the fire on a lot of issues. Spending is one of them. And there will be a big fight over infrastructure spending if, a lot of Republicans think it should be paid for, and that we can't go down the road of just adding more money, adding more debt, and of course, not balancing the budget. We're not going to balance the budget in the first year, that's for sure. But how do you balance those concerns as chairwoman of the Budget Committee?
And those are great concerns, not just of the Freedom Caucus, but of our entire conference. We've talked about this in the past, and for the 6 years that I have been here in Congress, I must say that one of the things we've done a good job in, and that is hold the discretionary side, is that we've been able to have those back to the 2008 levels. So discretionary side is not the side that you got to keep looking at to cut from. You've got to turn your eyes to the mandatory side, and we've got to get serious about reforming those. We've had a plan in the past. Of course, the past administration wouldn't even discuss these issues with us of reforming some of the big programs like the Social Security and the Medicare and the Medicaid. But these are programs that we have got to face, that if we want to have them for the future, if we want to have them for the people that are currently in the program and are expecting and have their whole life has been around planned around getting these benefits, then we've got to do something, not just for the folks that are coming up in the future, but even for people that are there in the present. And this is going to be a really hard discussion for us to have, Laura. We are going to hear from the CBO director today. We have a hearing at 10 o'clock this morning. We're going to be hearing the outlook of what he has for us. And then we're going to have to make some very tough decisions. And it's time to govern. And it's time to govern by taking on some very big, hard issues and finding a way to get our country back on a fiscal track of being solvent.
The wall cost, before we let you go, the president has said that Mexico is going to pay for the wall. Of course, Mexico says it's not going to pay for the wall. Then he also said that America might have to pay for the wall initially, but it'll be reimbursed. Are you guys going to get into discussions, or have you already gotten into discussions with the administration on the wall cost?
I have not been a part of those discussions, and I don't know.
That's important, don't you think? Or is that for appropriations?
Exactly. No, it is very, very important. No, it is important, and what we're waiting for right now, and we want Mick Mulvaney to be confirmed so that we can start talking about his Office on Management and Budget So OMB needs to give us their plan, and once we get that plan, then we can really have more serious conversations. But it's terrible that they're holding up all these confirmations, because these are all things that are very important that we can't move forward until we have someone in that office that gives us the president's plan.
So are you guys in neutral now without these people in place? Are you kind of in this no man's land or in limbo? Is that how you describe it?
No. We are moving forward. We're moving forward in the Budget Committee. We will have our hearing today with the Director of CBO to look at the outlook, and then we will begin next week and actually going through each one of the agencies and start looking at what we can do in each one of those agencies, and we'll be talking about Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security and possible reforms. So we are working on our side to move forward. We know what our job is and our role is. Of course, these are two branches of government. We want to work together with the president. So we are moving forward, Laura. I don't want to leave anybody to think that we're just waiting for the president to let us know.
I keep asking you I keep asking you another question, but I keep thinking of new things. So the question of how to trim the federal workforce, which is it's not that much in terms of the overall budget of cost. It's symbolic in many ways, but it's also important to trim the bureaucracy, because with each appointment, with each member of the civil service, there is, in my view, some bit of power taken away from states and localities, so power taken from the people invested in Washington. How do you actually cut the roles, the number of employees at each department? Trump's talked about this, but how is that done? Is it done both with congressional action, by legislation, and by the president's Office of Personnel Management or General Accounting? I mean, how is that done? It seems like a silly question maybe, but I'm curious. It really is more a president's prerogative to do that, and I know that he is talking about doing that. We have talked about in our committee of encouraging OMB to do an audit of each one of those departments. Here's something that we can do from our side, however, is we're going to be recommending that rather than, let's say, EPA, where they put a penalty on someone that, they haven't, this regulation or that regulation, they haven't conformed completely, and we can always have a discussion about EPA and what they do as they go in to these different companies. But to say instead of that fine going back to EPA, it should go in the general treasury. So here is one way that we could start to slim down what goes on in these departments, because obviously when they get those fines back in, what do? They hire one more person. Yeah, grow the bureaucracy.
Right, just grow the bureaucracy and cause more problems for our businesses.
I see.
We all want clean air and clean water.
Funnel the money back. Funnel the money to pay down the debt. That's what I would do. Use it to pay down our national debt.
Back in the treasury. Pay down the debt.
All right, Diane, thank you so much. Congresswoman Diane Black, who's the chairwoman of the Budget Committee, is going to be very busy this year. You better be busy, Diane, because if you're not, we're not.
I am.
We're not doing the right thing. But keep in touch with us, and we'll get back with you as things proceed in these first 100 days. Sounds like you're optimistic that change is going to be implemented, but you need to get these confirmations in place in order to really work with the executive branch in the way you have to. We appreciate it. We'll take a break, close this hour out. Don't go away. It's the free exercise clause. It's not the free worship clause. How you exercise your faith, how you live your faith, how you teach your children, this is your prerogative. And the government shall not abridge that. And Trump spoke to these concerns and these ideals. And we seek wisdom every day from the Almighty, from God, on how to best serve the American people. This speech was written for him, undoubtedly, but at that part of the speech, especially, you get a sense Trump meant that. He's not overly pious. That's obvious. He's not a regular churchgoer, but he's a believer. He's a patriot, and he's a believer. And he's unlike anything we've ever seen in Washington because he is a true disruptor. And we will remind you once again why Trump is such a disruptive force to the old guard and how he sent out his national security advisor, Mike Flynn, General Mike Flynn, yesterday in regards to how Iran has been behaving post-Iran deal. Now, remember, the Obama administration was always pussyfooting around Iran because they didn't want to rattle Iran too much, because after all, that Iran deal was supposed to help keep America safe, put off this nuclear program. It was our best chance of of preventing Iran from becoming a nuclear power in the Middle East. But, of course, Iran decides to test another ballistic missile. This is what Trump's national security advisor said yesterday.
These are just the latest of a series of incidents in the past 6 months in which Houthi forces that Iran has trained and armed have struck Emirati and Saudi vessels and threatened United States and allied vessels transiting the Red Sea. The Trump administration condemns such actions by Iran that undermine security, prosperity, and stability throughout and beyond the Middle East, and which places American lives at risk. President Trump has severely criticized the various agreements reached between Iran and the Obama administration, as well as the United Nations, as being weak and ineffective. Instead of being thankful to the United States in these agreements, Iran is now feeling emboldened. As of today, we are officially putting Iran on notice.
On notice, and what next? Iran responded today in the form of another, I believe, a tweet, and basically said, they talked about it on Morning Joe this morning, it basically said, well, we're going to do what we're going to do. Kind of pushing back against Trump. And, they the supreme leader in his response said, basically did a little brinkmanship against Trump on this.
The previous administration was reticent to push back against Iran, in part because the nuclear agreement was the centerpiece of the policy. What I think you're seeing here, and I think it's correct, is saying, yeah, the nuclear agreement's important. We're not going to rip it up. But there's an entire range of Iranian behavior, whether it's in Yemen, whether it's in Syria, whether it's in Iraq, whether it's in Lebanon, whether it's with Hamas, across the board. Iran now is a regional threat. This is a signal to the Saudis, the UAEs, essentially, that we are going to partner. And we're not going to be inhibited by the nuclear agreement from doing things like arming different friends, introducing new sanctions, and conceivably, under certain circumstances, using military force.
Richard Haas, of course, who worked for both Bush administrations, said, look, the other dynamic was impossible to sustain. You could have sustained it, just makes America weaker and weaker, makes the region less and less stable. Iran as a force in Syria has been horrific for civilians there, has helped lead to the migration crisis. When I saw this yesterday, I was both heartened and I wasn't concerned, but I do want to say again, I hope the administration isn't going to make the mistake that so many other administrations have made, which is in thinking that everything is about the Middle East. And when you put so much focus on the Middle East, you ultimately end up empowering other countries like China. And we have news, by the way, of China moving into Mexico to produce cars. I was warning about that last week, in that we disengage economically to a great extent with Mexico and would be opening the door to China. I brought this up to you last week, and indeed China, a deal which was undoubtedly in the works. But China will be moving forward to manufacture automobiles in Mexico for export. So that's new news that we learned about today. Jim in Illinois on line one of many people responding to this putting Iran on notice moment from yesterday. Jim.
Good morning. We do not need this agreement with Iran. It was the worst deal, the worst contract or whatever that America has ever made, of course done by Obama and Kerry. We don't need it. We don't need the Iranians for anything. I'll tell you what, they're building their stuff anyway. So let's just stop this whole agreement thing, keep the money, and tell them to take a flying walk.
Well, you're going to have more sanctions. I mean, the problem is the sanctions were removed not just from the United States, but from our European allies and others, and that means the U.S. can't really unilaterally do all that much with sanctions. It's not going to really damage Iran unless Trump is able to get other nations on his side here. So that's why that's really important. I mean, you do need to get the allies of the United States to join with us to say, this is just one more example of why Iran will never be a friendly force in the Middle East and cannot be trusted under this type of agreement. Just can't be. And we know we know this agreement won't prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. I mean, there's no more evidence that needs to be advanced to show that. So I think it was probably the right move. It would have been nice if we had a few more countries who were with us to say, you're on notice. I mean, it's okay. I mean, I'm not trying to criticize this, but I'm always thinking, like I'm sure they are, 2 or 3 steps ahead. 855-40-LAURA. Trump has also put the Senate on notice, in a way, when he talked about the Neil Gorsuch confirmation. A lot of folks were wondering whether Mitch McConnell will change the Senate rules in order to confirm Gorsuch with just 51 votes. And indeed, I predicted this on Fox repeatedly, that the Democrats are going to have to hold the line against Gorsuch. They feel like their pride was wounded, and they need to hit back at Trump for the Merrick Garland vacancy that was never, that he never assumed his position on the court, or let alone got a vote. But what did Trump say?
If we end up with the same gridlock that they've had in Washington for the last longer than 8 years, in all fairness to President Obama, a lot longer than 8 years, but if we end up with that gridlock, I would say, if you can, Mitch, go nuclear, because that would be an absolute shame if a man of this quality was caught up in the web. So I would say it's up to Mitch, but I would say go for it.
You're listening to the Laura Ingraham Show, 855-40-LAURA. So at this moment, Rex Tillerson, who is the new Secretary of State, is addressing all of the State Department employees. This after it looks like State Department employees could have leaked information about that call with Australia. Let's listen.
It seemed that this year's prayer breakfast, people felt the need to pray a little longer. But I certainly welcome them all. So thank you for such a warm reception. And it's a pleasure to be here. Obviously, I've been anxious to be here, and I'm so pleased to have my wife, Renda, of more than 30 years, and she has been just steadfast through this process, encouraging me on and reminding me what this is really all about. And so thank you. Also want to thank Acting Secretary Tom Shannon, who has just been superb through this entire process. And Tom, thank you so much. It was truly and indeed an honor that Tom joined us in the Oval Office last night for my swearing in, and appreciated that he was there. Obviously, I also want to recognize and thank all of you here at headquarters of our State Department, the staff and partners around the world who have faithfully performed your duties regardless of who was in charge. It was so important. I know many of you have assisted ambassadors and other officials during the Senate confirmation process, and indeed some of you have been through it yourself. Having just come through it for the first time, I can assure you the Senate still takes it as serious as ever. They're as energetic as ever. They're as thorough as ever. But we're here. In the days and weeks ahead, we're going to have plenty of opportunity to discuss in more detail the goals, the priorities, and the strategic direction for our organization. But for now, I really want to take a few minutes to communicate my high regard for the men and women of the State Department and share with you some principles for all of us to live by as we pursue our shared mission. The individuals who comprise this department are among the finest public servants in the world. Many of you serve our nation abroad and have served our nation abroad. State Department staffers in the field are not just conduits for policies and plans. You are our emissaries of our nation and the ideals we stand for. When people see you, they see America. When I wake up each morning, the very first thing I ask myself is, are all of our people safe? The safety of every single member of our State Department family, regardless of where he or she is posted, is not just a priority for me. It's a core value, and it will become a core value of this department. This means the State Department family here in the U.S. and all those agencies serving under Chief of Missions abroad, including civil service, foreign service officers and specialists, locally engaged staff of host country and third country nationals, interns, fellows, support contractors, and implementing partners, and not least of all, the family members who support us at home and in our service to our country overseas. The Foreign Service is not the only component of the State Department. The civil service workforce at the State Department plays an indispensable role in all we achieve, and we cannot attain success without the mission-critical services that you provide. Though we often live in a world of headlines, working outside of the public eye does not make you any less essential to our operations. Your dedication, your intelligence, and your sound judgment are the brick-and-mortar elements of all we do. We all depend on your good work, and I know it will continue. One of the great challenges and thrills for the State Department staff is deciding how to confront changing conditions in every corner of the world. And I encourage all of you to use your natural and well-developed skills to adapt to changes here at home as well. I know this was a hotly contested election, and we do not all feel the same way about the outcome. Each of us is entitled to the expression of our political beliefs, but we cannot let our personal convictions overwhelm our ability to work as one team. Let us be understanding with each other about the times we live in as we focus our energies on our departmental goals. As Secretary, I will deploy the talent and resources of the State Department in the most efficient ways possible. That may entail making some changes to how things are traditionally done in this department. Change for the sake of change can be counterproductive, and that will never be my approach. But we cannot sustain ineffective traditions over optimal outcomes. I will gather information on what processes should be reformed.
This is really good. Tillerson's talking about ways to reorganize the State Department. We'll take a break. We'll bring this back to you. When we come back, we'll continue in just a few moments. Tillerson addressing the country the first time as Secretary of State, speaking to the State Department employees. Great debut for Rex Tillerson, discussing the role of the State Department, critical role in the new world we live in that is marred by, of course, terrorism, the challenge from Asia, radicalization on the internet and beyond, a very large bureaucracy at the State Department, the number of employees, the budget, 30,266 people working throughout the State Department and all across the globe.
Yes, and that's 75,000 across the globe, Laura, 30,000 employees just in the United States, just like Mr. Tillerson just said.
Okay, so
it's not also, we don't need to forget that the nearly 1,000 State Department staffers that condemned Trump's travel ban, who he was just putting on notice, as we saw there.
Yeah, so again, you're going to disagree with Trump's policies while you're working for the U.S. taxpayer at the State Department. He put them on notice. So put your political disagreement. Not everybody voted for Donald Trump in this State Department, but now it's time to put that aside. And I think that was one of the best introductions to a cabinet secretary that I've ever seen. And very humble. He read this statement, but that was okay. And it was very funny, kind of self-effacing. I'm the new kid in town. And I liked it very much. Nice, very nice debut for Rex Tillerson. 855-40-LAURA. Dr. Sebastian Gorka will stop by. I'm sure he watched. Don't go away. Employees, and they're all deployed all over the world, as we know, and working in missions, ambassadors, consulates, representing the United States. And many of them are Democrats. Many of them are civil servants. Their career civil servants and diplomats, and a lot of them never liked Trump, probably don't like Trump now, but he said we might disagree. We have to respectfully do so, and now we're on one team. You got to set aside your political differences for the good of the country, given all the challenges we face. Joining us now is Dr. Sebastian Gorka, and Dr. Gorka is going to tell us, as Deputy Assistant to the President, what we can expect moving forward in a very dangerous time. We have news on Iran, of course, news on Mexico, and Tillerson's debut, I thought, was among the best that I've seen in all my time in Washington. Humility, grace, strength, all at one time. Sebastian, great to talk to you. How are you?
I'm just pinching myself every day. It's amazing the people the president has surrounded himself with. It's a great time to be an American, Laura, and thanks for having me back on your show.
Absolutely. Let's talk about what Tillerson was getting at. A lot of us who've been observing what's happened with some of the leaks coming out of the administration early on, especially with a call to the Australian Prime Minister yesterday, where we had a transcript of that call leaked to the press. He's basically saying, get on the team. Come on. We're all on one team now. Is that kind of naive, though, given the fact that every administration has had its problems with leakers and opponents inside the bureaucracy?
I don't think so. I don't think it's naive. I mean, I just think about the common sense attitude one has to have, either as a voter or a federal employee or a bureaucrat. The reality is nobody should be surprised that a man who wins the election proceeds, once he's in office, to actually execute the promises that he made to the people who elected him. So, people shouldn't be surprised by the measures he has already taken at whirlwind speed, because these are the things he promised us as Americans for the last year and a half. And secondly, look at who Rex Tillerson is, look at who President Trump is. These are incredibly successful businessmen. This is the top tier. And when you take over a company, when you buy a company, what happens? The vision of the CEO drives the future of that institution. And as a result, it is one team. And if as Sean Spicer said in his masterful press conference just a few days ago, he said, look, if you don't agree with the policies of the new CEO, in this case the president, then there really is very little option left for you. I mean, you can resign or perhaps you will be fired like the acting AG. So that's the reality of a new sheriff in town called Donald J. Trump.
Let's talk about the call with Australia yesterday. Australia is one of our staunchest allies. How did that call seem to go awry, ending only after 25 minutes? It was, according to reports, slated to be about an hour-long call. And, obviously, Australia is not an existential threat to the United States, but there seems to be some disagreement about the refugees, 1,200 refugees in Australia who are on their way to the United States. Trump not happy about that.
Yeah, look, I am not going to comment on calls made by the president with other heads of state, but again, this is a new dawn, a new day. This is a new administration that is reestablishing our relations around the world. And in the last 8 years, what have we seen, Laura? We've seen this peculiar, almost oxymoronic statement of leading from behind. Well, those days are over. The American republic, as was, is back on the scene. We're not going to hide ourselves or apologize for ourselves, and our friends will welcome that. And our enemies have been put on notice. Just look at what the general, Lieutenant General Mike Flynn said yesterday with regards to Iran. So it is a new morning, and our friends and our enemies will have to recognize that reality.
General Flynn's statement yesterday, the first time we've seen him in front of the microphones in a long time, and he put Iran on notice. What does this mean? I believe Iran responded in some type of statement earlier today, saying, essentially, we're going to do what we're going to do. We're not doing anything in violation of the Iranian, the Iran deal. But what was that meant to say to our allies in the region and to Iran?
One very simple thing. We're not going to give away our strategy, our policies, or our tactics in advance, as has so often been the case in the past. But we're not going to do what the Obama administration did, which is to embolden, to strengthen one of the most dangerous nations in the world. We sent a very clear message. This is a state sponsor of terrorism, the largest one. And on top of that, it is also a nation that is destabilizing the region as we speak, from Yemen with its proxies right through to the Gulf, to the actions it's taken harassing our vessels, the vessels of our partner nations. That era has ended, and it couldn't have been more unequivocally stated yesterday by the National Security Advisor that Iran will no longer be propped up and will no longer be emboldened by U.S. foreign policy. That's the message we were sending.
China has announced that they are investing in a Mexican auto plant. This is on the heels of the dust-up with Trump and Peña Nieto last week. $200 million in a Mexican auto plant. About up to 10,000 vehicles could be produced at the plant within the next 4 years, and these vehicles will be assembled there and then exported. Are we concerned that if our relationship with Mexico deteriorates under misunderstanding or the wall, or that this gives an opening to China in our hemisphere?
Well, look, Mexico is an incredibly important country to America. But we also know that China, in the last decade, has been acting in terms of almost the best word would be economic warfare. If you look at its actions in Africa, if you look at what it did in Afghanistan with regard to natural resources, they are a nation that may not go to war with the West, but will exploit every potential possibility to create double-digit growth for that nation, which is what it has to maintain. And if you look at its actions with the building of fake atolls and the installation of military bases on them, this again is a nation that isn't like any other. It's not. You can't compare Iran or China to Belgium or Vanuatu. These are anti-status quo actors, and they must be understood as such. Laura, I'm going to have to run to another interview, but I'd love to come back anytime on your show.
Sebastian Gorka, we appreciate it, here on the Laura Ingraham Show, Deputy Assistant to the President. We'll take a break. We'll get to all of your calls. Be very patient. As a new poll comes out that shows the public overwhelmingly supports the Trump push to limit immigration, and specifically the refugees and the visas from certain countries. We'll take a break. I'll tell you about that and a lot more. Don't go away. With these executive orders, and I criticize the rollout of the immigration pause, the refugee pause, and the visa pause, I should call it, ban pause. Trump yesterday said, I don't care what you call it. Everyone's quibbling over what you call it. So I criticize that. And I think it was done well. I don't think it was choreographed well. I think it was rushed, and it gave a real opening for the left to organize and protest, and they took the narrative away from the administration. The administration has to keep the narrative. But the good news is, as I mentioned before the break, the polls are on Donald Trump's side. It reminds me of the election cycle. Despite what the left is saying and all the protesters and all the people who are paid to protest, most of them are paid, Reuters commissioned this poll that Breitbart properly reported on. Reuters didn't properly report on their poll on what Americans thought about Trump's pro-American immigration reform that he's doing. And so the left portrays this as hateful and incompetent. The Democrat voters want to obstruct the new president. But the most direct question in the poll showed a 7-point advantage for Trump's policy, 48% support to 41% opposition. However, that hard-edge yes or no blocking refugees and banning people question is an unreliable guide because they asked it different ways. Because most Americans want to help both their fellow Americans and foreign strangers. And so it all depends on how you ask the question. Do you want America to be heartless and lacking in compassion and dealing with mothers and children who are fleeing horrific violence in Syria with nowhere to turn? That's going to be different than do you support America's and the president being able to control who comes into the country and how they're vetted. And as a temporary pause proper given what the country is facing. And that answer is going to be much different from the previously worded one. One indirect question used by Reuters pollster asked if the United States, quote, should limit the number of refugees allowed into the country. That question scored 66% support to 26% opposition, showing overwhelming yet hidden support for Trump's new policy of welcoming a limited inflow of refugees while excluding hostile migrants. Better still for Trump, the strong, quote, strong support for his refugee limiting policy was 3 times as large as the, quote, strong opposition, 32% to 10%, and the GOP voters' response was very similar to the response from swing voting independents. Again, it's being done, this pause in the refugee program and the visa holders coming into the country from 7 critical nations, that's being done, in the estimation of this president, for the need to protect Americans. And most Americans in these polls understand that. And yet, when we look at the way Reuters reports on its own poll, they do so in a slanted and biased manner. Again, this should not surprise you. This was done throughout the election cycle. The polling was either altogether bad or skewed, or the questions were asked in a way that either would intimidate people from answering the way they really felt, or just were off the proper topic and the proper focus.
They're eggheads. They're just eggheads. They have no common sense whatsoever.
No, I agree on that. 855-40-LAW. Do we have time for a call? Yes? Yeah, okay, let's go to Robert in Virginia on line 6. Robert.
Oh, Lord, it's nice to speak with you this morning. Listen, you need to run for Senate in Virginia. You'd win. There's a lot of people. I'm from Hampton. There's a lot of people in this area that will support you and get behind you. There's no way you can lose. You should do it. Do it.
Where are you from?
Hampton.
Oh, Hampton. That's
Hampton,
conservative.
Virginia, right here. All the military.
That's military. You guys, of course.
Trump campaign.
Yeah, anyone who has an R next to his or her name is going to win Hampton, though. You know, you try to win Northern Virginia, that's a different deal. You try to win where all the government bureaucrats live up in, Fairfax County. It's brutal. It's even going out to Prince William County is difficult now. Sterling, Virginia, that go all the way out. It gets more and more difficult for Republicans. But look, if I run, it's only I'm running because I think if I run, I'd run because I thought I could win. And no disrespect to Tim Kaine, but oh my gosh, I mean that debate would be I don't want to boast or brag, that's not cool, but I don't even know if I'd have to prepare for that. I mean, maybe some Virginia history, but other than that, just brush up on that. But Tim Kaine.